Welcome to my fishing guide for Final Fantasy XIV Patch 6.1. This guide is meant for fishers who are at level 90, but aren't quite sure how to fit the fishing kit together. While Fisher is considered a disciple of the land job, it is quite different from the traditional gatherers. At a glance, there's a substantial amount of information hidden from the player, and it's paired with a fair amount of randomness as well. These two aspects can make it hard to get started, but hopefully, my guide will be able to clear things up and give you a clear starting path on how best to utilize your tools. Once you know the basics, you'll be able to go forth and snag some aquarium fish, crafting materials, and scripts. In a future video, I'll discuss big fishing, and then you can complete your fishing log too. Maybe. I'll start this off by going over stats. As with the other gatherers, fishers have 3 stats to consider: Gathering, Perception, and GP. We'll start with Gathering. It does slightly different things depending on whether you're rod fishing or spearfishing. For rod fishing, Gathering affects how long it takes for fish to bite and the chance you can successfully reel in the fish. Gathering also affects the yield from double and triple hook. In spearfishing, Gathering affects the hitboxes of a fish, making them easier to spear. If your gathering is very low, fish oftentimes won't even have a hitbox, making them effectively impossible to catch. Each fish has a maximum threshold for how effective gathering is, meaning you cannot outgear fish, even if you're going for a Realm Reborn fish while in Endwalker gear. It should be a priority to hit these thresholds, but once you're there, feel free to start allocating stats toward Perception, which tends to be less important, and GP, which is usually more important. Perception increases the chance of getting a large-sized fish. I'll be using this term a lot, but large-sized, in this case, refers to large-sized catches of a given species, not just raw size. The chance can be up to 20% before other abilities are factored in. Large-sized fish will always give an Angler's Art stack when rod fishing, and have around a 70% chance of conferring one when spearfishing. I'll cover what those can be used for when I go over farming fish. Additionally, large-sized fish are usually used when mooching, using a catch as bait for other fish. There are many fishing abilities that can compensate for low perception, such as Patience, Nature's Bounty, and Prize Catch. As a result, perception isn't the most important stat for fishers. It shouldn't be neglected, but if you're using on-level gear, you're probably close to what you already need. GP is used for many of your fisher abilities. In general, these abilities can be used to work around many fishing mechanics. I'll go over some of the more helpful ones later in this guide. At level 90, assuming you finished all of your job quests, you'll regenerate 8 GP per 3 real-time seconds, which is about 160 GP per minute. In summary, Gathering tends to be the most important stat, followed by GP, and then Perception. If you already have melds suited for Miner and Botanist, however, you should only consider remelding if you have insufficient gathering. Anyway, that's enough about the stats. Time to go over the actual fishing process. There's 2 types of fishing that players can do: rod fishing and spearfishing. At its core, rod fishing is pretty simple. Find a fishing spot, pick your bait, cast your rod, and reel the fish in. If you want to efficiently gather fish, however, you'll need to take into account certain mechanics, as well as your various abilities. I'll go over the mechanics first. These can help you identify your fish before you reel it in. Bite types are one of the important mechanics found during rod fishing. Each type is indicated by the amount of exclamation points above your head. They can be separated into 3 categories: weak, strong, and ferocious. All fish of a given species will have the same bite type, so if you're targeting, say, a fish that has a strong bite, you can opt to let all weak and ferocious bites escape. Bite timings are another mechanic that can be used to identify fish. Each fish species has a specific time range where they will bite, so you can choose to ignore bite times that are clear outliers relative to your desired fish. I recommend creating a basic macro that activates on Cast, Mooch, and Mooch 2. The one I use is a generalized macro that displays the time every 3 seconds, but if you're focused on farming a specific fish, you can tailor it to your timing needs. Again, if your gathering is on the lower end, fish will bite more slowly than with high gathering, but that should only be an issue for fishers that are significantly behind on gear. You're probably wondering, why is it so important to pay attention to these things? Well, if you reel in everything that bites, you'll spend a substantial amount of time in that reeling animation, time that could be spent going for another attempt. Additionally, certain fishing abilities have a GP cost incurred on hooks, so blindly hooking results in throwing GP at undesirable fish. Lastly, many fishing buffs fall off upon the next successful catch, such as prize catch and surface slap, which really digs into the GP reserves. So, by being more selective, it's possible to get more done with less time and GP. It's important to keep track of these mechanics when you start to farm fish. Next, I'll be going over abilities you can use to boost your gathering efficiency. There's two main groups of fish that can be farmed, non-collectible and collectible fish. Depending on what you're going for, you'll have to adjust which abilities should be used. Non-collectible fish are the fish that are generally used as aquarium fish, crafting materials, Grand Company and leave turn-ins, and so on. If you're farming non-collectible fish, you should allocate your GP towards abilities that increase yield. Double and triple hook are your go-tos at 400 and 700 GP respectively. Triple hook ends up being slightly more GP efficient. As far as other abilities go, Chum is a solid filler ability. For 100 GP, you can reduce the bite timing on your next cast by roughly 40%. If your fish is a straight catch, you can consider using Identical Cast at 350 GP to guarantee a recatch, or Surface Slap at 200 GP on an undesired fish to remove it from the catch pool temporarily, at least until your next successful catch. If your fish requires mooching, using a catch as bait, you'll need to plan around getting large-sized fish or bypassing that requirement. At 200 GP, prize catch guarantees that your next catch is large-sized, so it works well if you can identify your fish before hooking it. If the mooch fish is hard to isolate, Patience 2 is the go-to move for getting large-sized, moochable fish. At 560 GP to activate, it is expensive and it confers a hook rate penalty that makes double and triple hook unreliable. Additionally, you'll need to match hook sets to the bite types. Precision to weak bites and powerful for strong bites. Despite these drawbacks, it is well worth the cost as it lasts for 145 seconds and is very consistent for getting large-sized fish. As a bonus, you'll get Angler's Art stacks. These can be converted into GP with Thaliak's Favor at a 3 stack to 150 GP ratio, or spent on makeshift baits, which costs 5 stacks, but removes the size requirement on mooching for 145 seconds. Try pooling your GP before activating makeshift bait, so you can double and triple hook the fish more easily. Lastly, Mooch 2 can be used to mooch a normal-sized fish once per 3 minutes, helpful for creating more double or triple hook opportunities. Collectible fish are generally used as turn-ins at collectible appraiser NPCs, or at the custom, facet, and studium delivery NPCs. Each turn-in can grant white or purple gatherer's scripts. Additionally, certain collectible fish can undergo ethereal reduction, converting the fish into ever-important aether sands. To gather collectible fish, you will need to activate the collect action. There is no reward for the non-collectible versions. Collectability rating is affected by size. Yield-boosting abilities do not provide any benefit, so your most important tool is Patience 2, though prize catch can be considered if you can identify your catch before the hook. As always, feel free to use Chum as filler, an Identical Cast or Surface Slap if the fish is a straight catch. That's a pretty good primer for rod fishing. Now, it's time to talk about spearfishing. Patch 6.0 reworked spearfishing substantially. In its current iteration, spearfishing is an active minigame where you catch fish as they move across your screen. Each node lasts for a limited amount of time determined by the wariness gauge. This gauge increases as time goes on, as well as with each attempted catch. As with rod fishing, you can boost your gathering efficiency by identifying fish via certain mechanics and by utilizing your fishing abilities. Let's start with the mechanics. In rod fishing, fishers could narrow down what fish they had by watching for bite types. In spearfishing, they can look at the size of the fish zooming across their field of view. All fish of a given species will appear the same size. Additionally, their hitboxes will be the same as well. Remember that hitbox sizes are dependent on your gathering stat, to the point where they will disappear entirely if your gathering is too low. Aside from size, swim speed is the other mechanic that can be used to identify fish. All fish of a given species have the same speed, so you can ignore other speeds when targeting a specific fish. By being selective with what you catch, you can reduce the time spent traveling between nodes, and reduce the amount of GP spent on undesired catches. Now that I've covered spearfishing mechanics, here's what you need to do when you're looking to farm. Unlike rod fishing, spearfishing does not have any direct yield boosting abilities. As such, the strategy for spearfishing remains the same for both non-collectible and collectible fish. You'll want to spear the fish that have the appropriate size and swim speed of your desired fish. It's not too worthwhile to maintain the catch counter. At 300 GP, Baited Breath is nice as a filler move. It lowers the wariness gauge, allowing you to stay at the node longer. Veteran Trade is a little more niche than Surface Slap, but still helpful. It prevents the most recent caught fish from reappearing in the current session. It does come at the cost of 200 GP and increased wariness from catching a fish, so you'll likely have to decide on a case-by-case basis whether to use it. The only thing that is collectible specific is Nature's Bounty. It costs 100 GP and increases the size of your next catch. If you need help catching fish, dump Angler's Art stacks into Vital Sights. At the cost of 2 stacks, fish will have larger hitboxes for the rest of the current session. Otherwise, pool them for Thaliak's favor as needed. Now that you know how to efficiently gather fish, you'll be able to go out and grab them whenever, right? Not necessarily. It's common for fish to be available only when certain conditions are met. There's a surprising amount of factors that are taken into account, and I'll go over each of them in the next section. As mentioned previously, fishing hides a lot of information from the player. That becomes very apparent when you're trying to target a fish. For rod fishing, there's a few conditions that can affect a fish's availability: bait, weather or weather transitions, time, snagging, and fisher's intuition. Spearfishing has less to worry about. Swimming shadows is the most frequent condition, with fisher's intuition and time being very rare as of patch 6.1. If you're going for a quest-related fish, the game might be nice enough to give you information. Otherwise, you'll have to do some experimenting in-game, or consult third-party resources for fish conditions. I'd imagine most people prefer the latter. One of my go-to resources is a fish tracking app known as Carbuncle Plushie. This website has all the essential information available for overworld fish. Here's an example listing. You can see real-time estimates for when it is available, the location, timing, weather, intuition, and ideal bait for each fish. If you know nothing about your target fish, this is a fantastic place to get started. Another great resource to check is Teamcraft. Teamcraft has even more in-depth information on each fish. You'll be able to find things like bite timings, probabilities of certain bites, and the success rate of hooking fish. It's definitely worth referencing if you want to plan out optimal strategies for fish. As far as conditions go, bait, weather or weather transitions, and time are pretty self-explanatory, but you're probably wondering what snagging, fisher's intuition, and swimming shadows are. These conditions are more niche, but it is worthwhile to learn about them, so you aren't caught off guard if a fish requires them. Occasionally, certain fish will require the snagging ability to be active. Snagging is mostly used for stuff like coral, oysters, and the like. It is also possible to catch maps while it is active. If you're targeting fish that don't require snagging, toggle it off. While minor, having extra fish in the catch pool can reduce the chances of your target fish biting. Fisher's intuition is an uncommon condition. It is granted by catching other fish in your current fishing spot. The requirements for each intuition differ on a case-by-case basis. It is a temporary buff that is required to catch certain fish, and is good for one catch only. Intuition during rod fishing can be handled across multiple casts, but intuition during spearfishing must be resolved within the same window it is conferred. Try to pool your resources before triggering an intuition window, so that you can make the most out of the limited time it's available. Swimming shadows are specific to spearfishing. Similar to Fisher's intuition, they are spearfishing nodes that manifest when catching certain fish in your current fishing spot. The requirement for each set of swimming shadows differs on a case-by-case basis. You will need to have Truth of Oceans active to locate and interact with them. As long as you stay in the same map region, they will last indefinitely, so feel free to take them on when you have full resources. Fishing can be a bit obscure at times, but hopefully, the knowledge within this guide was a good introduction to the job. If you have any additional questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I also recommend checking out Fisherman's Horizon, the Fishers Discord for Final Fantasy XIV. Their resources were a huge help when I was still figuring out how to fish. Thank you everyone for taking the time to view my guide, and I hope to see you guys again when I release a video going over big fishing. Until next time,